Welcome to the Escape News Podcast. I'm your host, Chad.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan.
And thanks for joining us today. And today we are talking about the future, but also the past. We're talking about what could be and what people said there was going to be. And so I'm going to be leading the charge on this with the book by John Brunner, that is named Stand on Zanzibar. And I will just up front tell you, I did not read the book thoroughly. I had the opportunity to, and reading through it was like psychedelic in some ways. It's a bit convoluted. Oh man, yeah, like this book. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I listened to a lot of things about it, what it says in it, other things, other opinions on it. I read sections of it, but it is really, I felt like it was hard to read personally. I don't know. Have you checked it out at all?
I haven't. I mean, it sounds like it might be interesting, but like I have to be in the mood for something like that. Some of the stuff gets too crazy. So
what makes it so complicated? Okay, so first off, we'll deal with the predictions and things. That's what we really want to get to. But I want to hit. So John Brunner, he's a British guy. He wrote it in 1968, and everybody thinks of this book nowadays because of how much he got right. But what makes the book, I felt like, difficult to read was the way that it was written in these different, it was written in like modes and stuff and he was trying to build a world basically. And his world building, he was using these modes that I felt like were complicated. But they make sense because it's more how you experience life, I guess. So he used this mode that was like the Innis mode. And there were multiple, like if you read through the book, it changes how he's talking and what's happening. So, okay, Innis mode, basically it's like you're hearing quotes and TV excerpts and things like that. It's just the world is being built by the news and various segments from what you might read in the newspaper or TV. And I might not be entirely right on this Innis mode because it's obviously more complicated than that, but there's just lots of information about like, oh, hey, some new law went into effect, this happened here, blah, blah, blah stuff. Yeah. And then it switches also over to happening mode where it's like you're walking down the street and you hear a conversation, or you walk and you see some stuff over here and you see a billboard and then you see somebody doing this and you hear something else, some music in the background, and it's just constantly changing, like walking through a room and you have tidbits of everything, which when I think about that, like I'm not usually walking through the room listening to everybody's conversations. I'm like, I have my objective where I'm going, so I'm like completely ignore what's around me sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm not like super familiar with this. This was like very complicated to listen to or read, I feel like.
Yeah.
And then it will have tracking with close-ups, and usually this is pertaining to like anecdotes with lesser characters. So it's just focused on smaller segments and smaller like bits of information with these people. And then also there's a thing called the continuity, or it's the plot. Basically, here's the story of what's going on. And the gist of what's going on is, let me just go back to my notes here. There were two guys that are the protagonists of sorts, the two main people. Norman House, he's a black Muslim man, and he's trying to be a businessman, and he gets to be in charge of a utopian society, is the gist. And then he has a roommate named Donald Hogan, who's a white guy, and he becomes a spy for America. And his goal is to invade a made-up Asian country called Yucatan, and he tries to start a revolution there to stop scientific progress. So there's the story in a nutshell, but obviously it's a lot more than that. The actual story of what this is about and why he wrote this is overpopulation in the world in the future. He believes that humanity's going to be depressed and things are going to go awful because the idea is that back in 68, I guess the whole human population could stand upright on the Isle of Wight in the UK. But in his story, he predicted that by the year 2010, that the population would be 7 billion people. And at that point, you'd need a new island to stand on to fit all those people, and thus the island of Zanzibar. So his prediction, starting off with his prediction here, he said 7 billion people in 2010. He reached, in real life, our population in the world reached 7 billion in 2011. So it's not very far off. That's really good. Yeah. And obviously you have like tons of other people who made predictions and things like Leonardo da Vinci, H.G. Wells, Arthur C. Clarke, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, 1984. Everybody knows that one. Space Odyssey. And there's a lot of other things. Fahrenheit 451 is another really popular one that predicted earbuds and headphones and things like that. So when you're writing sci-fi, it's obviously not that hard to like get something right, but it's amazing the amount of things that he talked about in this But he was obviously coming from the angle of the world is going to be overpopulated, and this is what's going to happen because of it. So there's rampant, like, I would say genocide, but like eugenics, like they're just killing off people. And there's a massive, like, this giant computer that runs the world. And there's big corporations, like there's this fake country in Africa that wants to sell itself to an American corporation to save it because its president's dying and the economy is bad. And then I guess one of the big things was like this one nation. I can't remember exactly. I think it might have been Zanzibar, but I don't remember exactly. They announced to the world that they're going to modify all their people into superhumans with genetic like manipulation or whatever.
Yeah.
So... That's interesting. I felt like it was kind of disturbing material to like read throughout it and like listen to some of the stuff because there's a lot of stuff you're dealing with, all the bad parts of the world. Basically, like he was saying, like the world of today would be just awful, and some people agree to that. Some people don't. Obviously, I don't think it's that awful because I don't like wake up and go outside and some computer's standing there to shoot me or anything like that. Like nothing like that happens around here. But obviously, like if you live in a bigger city and it is overpopulated, you should leave the big city, is my opinion, but so they deal with like social criticism, gender issues, racial issues, the meaning of life, technology, society are like the big prevalent things. And it just goes throughout the whole world with various perspectives throughout life. And so like he's hitting cultures and people from all over the world. And of course, you'll hear about this whole new hip language that he also kind of made up. Like, what was it again? Do you remember the term for it? It's like hip speak or something.
It's like a jargon or something. Or...
Something like that. He has like there's a dictionary. I think it's like the Devil's Dictionary or something like that. Like he has an explanation of like different words and what they mean in the future, and it's all like two-sided. Like humans can hold two things to be true that are opposite of each other, and things like that.
Oh, yeah. Like cognitive dissonance or some kind of paradox kind of thing?
Yeah. That was
cognitive dissonance. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So here's just a list of predictions, basically. And I don't know that it's hard for me to say that he was writing it with the intention of predicting things. I don't feel like that was the case. He was more, I felt like, based on what I read and heard about it, that he was trying to say that, hey, the world is going to be overpopulated and we need to do something about that or handle that, and it's going to be awful. Yeah. And in looking at that issue, he just happened upon all these other things. But, I mean, he was pretty close on with a lot of this. So here's a couple of predictions. And this is a massive list. And we obviously know, like, these things have happened. Like, the European Union was a big thing. Like he said, the European Union would be a thing. But the UK would side more often with the US was one of the points he made in there, which is pretty true. I mean, look at Brexit.
Brexit, yeah. Huh.
Yep. Global TV channels via satellite, which I feel like that is true to some degree, because so his story was written in 1968, but it was set in I believe 2017. I can't remember where I wrote down the date. It's around this time, basically. Yeah, maybe it's 2010. I don't remember. Or maybe it was 2010, because his prediction was 7 billion people. Anyways, like the TV satellite thing, I agree to some degree, but and he says about 24-hour news, but like at the same time, like TV, I feel like is kind of dying, and it's making way for like new streaming services and other things on the internet. So
well, I mean the internet was not. Internet was never predicted to be what it became back in the 60s. I mean, back then we saw what DARPANET was a defense. It was literally a defense network, so that military could connect to each other, and it kind of became like an academic thing. Caltech and another university like contacted each other over that network. So yeah, the internet was never seen to be a thing, but we did get like global satellite 24/7 news network type stuff. CNN, I think, at the time when Turner created that, I mean, that was kind of their thing. And we've had the 24-hour news cycle for a while, but yeah, you're right. TV is starting to kind of die. It's more going to, internet-based things. So, but still,
which you could argue is like the same thing, sort of.
Yeah, that's true. Just different way of delivering it. Yeah. But still, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Starlink.
Yeah, Starlink, exactly. So he also said about in-flight, I was about to say in-flight marijuana, which might be a thing. So he said in-flight entertainment is what he was going to be talking about. That became a thing. Obviously, we know that. Legalization of marijuana, more opportunities for blacks in America, and then also backlash with racism and hate. And we see that. Laser printers, we know about those. I mean, printers to a crazy degree. I mean, I have friends who have not just like laser printers, but like 3D printers and all kinds of crazy stuff. So he also talks about U.S. being plagued by terrorism, which, I mean, it was... I guess back in the 60s, it was difficult from what I've read and what other people's opinions were that being in the late 60s, the idea that the U.S. would be plagued by terrorism was ridiculous, that could happen. Yeah. But you go back and there are plenty of people who, I mean, when were we like really involved in the Middle East? It was sometime around then. It was shortly after that.
I think it was just starting to ramp up, but I don't think most people didn't think that that our involvement in the Middle East would have resulted in like radical Islamic terrorist backlash. Because I think we were supporting regimes in the Middle East because there's the whole proxy war with Russia. That was kind of sort of starting up, and I think it was super early, but that kind of started to become more of a thing, I want to say, in the 80s. Because there's a lot of... the proxy war at the time was with Russia, and it was kind of a Cold War type of thing. Maybe a thawing war, I don't know. But yeah, I think it was just in the very, very, very early stages. But
which,
still...
speaking of impressive. Russia, though, like... He predicted that China becomes the U.S.'s most powerful rival in replacement of Russia, which
true.
I think Russia and China are kind of like hand in hand in a lot of things nowadays, but China is much, I don't know, like if they're more powerful than Russia.
Russia's economy is, I want to say, is very much tied to oil. And they kind of have a hegemony on that, but I mean, if you've seen like a lot of the like the House of Saud, and a lot of them they're starting to divest a lot of their holdings in oil. They're trying, at least at the very least, trying to become like more balance that out elsewhere, more diversified. But I saw where they are trying to kind of like get out from under oil, because I mean, with renewables still on the horizon, those have not gone away, and they've gotten a little better. So they're I don't know if you want to say it's the writing on the wall, but I mean, at that point, Russia's economy is going to start. If Russia doesn't pivot to something else or try to diversify, then they could be in a bad way.
Yeah.
But China definitely has a better position, a little more stable. So
yeah, it's really. It's interesting what he predicted here, which, I mean, in the 60s, I feel like you couldn't have looked at China and said they're going to be a super anything, because, I mean, back then, I mean, from what I've seen in pictures and stuff, it wasn't going to be a superpower. But
it wasn't until Nixon, was it Nixon? He was the one to kind of pave the way for China, or to kind of open those first relationships with China. I think something like that. I'm really terrible. I'm trying to remember some economic history. Kind of thing.
It's complicated. I mean, it's hard to remember all the people. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of countries that are involved, and so. Anyways, there's quite a bit of other stuff that he listed on here. Young people less likely to becoming committed to marriage. Motor vehicles running on electricity, which we're still working on that one. Normalize mass killings because of overcrowding, which I had already mentioned. Puerto Rico is a U.S. state, which they've been working on that for years, and still don't know if that, I don't know if that's going to happen, because I don't think our U.S. they vote, and they're like, we're going to vote ourselves into being part of the U.S., but I don't think that matters. I think the U.S. itself has to say that they can be part of it, and I don't think there's enough people here or enough congressional pressure or whatever to actually make that happen.
So it's not in. So here's the thing. I read something recently. Puerto Rico or Puerto Ricans, they're not. Apparently, they're not like super on board for statehood, because I think a lot of them came to realize that, like, okay, what exactly would we gain from statehood? And it was like, well, now we're paying like higher taxes, I think was kind of the trade-off. And then nothing really else changes. I mean, I guess they have a greater say in the elections, but is that really worth it? And so like that was, so like I think some of that may be changing. I mean, I could be totally wrong, but
Yeah.
I thought I read that like the wind of opinion on Puerto Rican statehood was kind of changing with the newer generation, because they're not really seeing a benefit. All they're seeing is like, okay, well, we're not really getting a whole lot out of this, and things are okay the way they are. I mean, Puerto Rico has their own issues that they have to deal with. I think they have a lot of corruption in their current government. But I mean, are they a protectorate? Is that how they're officially designated, at least in relation to the U.S.? I can never seem to keep that straight in my head.
But what you're saying makes sense. I mean, that's a really good point. Like, I mean, how much do you really gain in voting in the U.S. when you now have to pay taxes, like, or your taxes go up? Like,
and from a political standpoint, I think the Democrat Party, I think, stands to gain the most, because they'll be getting a heavier, like they'll be getting a more advantageous position, because I think the majority of Puerto Ricans tend to vote more Democrat than Republican.
Okay.
So they would get a better position. Like they would strengthen their current position and within the government as a whole by bringing Puerto Rico on as a state. But again, a lot of Puerto Ricans may not really care about that. So it's kind of weird. At one time I thought it was pretty like, oh, they definitely want statehood. Now it's like, I don't think they want statehood. So I don't really know.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It keeps coming up, and I think the last time it came up, I thought they voted against it, or they whatever preliminary thing, or they just didn't have enough votes. Yeah, it's a mixed bag at the very least. It's not. There's not a consensus. So
yeah, exactly. So on this one, this is like a prediction and not like an actuality as of yet. But there's a few other things in here: gay and bisexual lifestyles becoming common, random acts of violence at schools, a real-time social network that was somewhat described similar to Twitter, and then old colonial divides holding Africa back in the world, which we still see that. They also predicted tobacco becoming less popular because of like social pressure and stuff, which is very interesting, because back then like they definitely didn't care.
Right. Oh no, it was a big deal. And was it 90s or something like that? Like was a Runaway Jury was a movie.
Yeah.
Well, so that was, what was that on? It was based on a book. The book dealt with tobacco. The movie changed the position to something else, gun control maybe.
Yeah.
But the original book, that Runaway Jury, the movie, John Cusack, that was based on, the book dealt with tobacco companies, and then as a result of all that, they kind of the popularity of smoking kind of diminished greatly. That's interesting. This Stand on Zanzibar really kind of hit a lot of really good points.
It really did.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because talking about the computer aspect of it, which I think you'll talk about, like he predicted that there'd be a big computer running things, but I think Roko's Basilisk is just a different version of that in a way, rather than one that's like controlling the world, trying to help it. It comes at it, a thought experiment from a different point. So yeah.
That's interesting. I may have to pick up that book.
Well,
at least get Cliff Notes or something. Yeah, I might just get, like I said, Cliff Notes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, do you have anything more on that, or?
No, that's about all I got for this.
Okay. Yeah, so Roko's Basilisk. So this also kind of has to do with some futurism, or there's an element of futurism involved in it. But so I guess I should probably give a quick disclaimer. I found that some people are like, they take this very seriously, and they're very careful.
Oh yeah.
The whole thing about it is, if you learn about the details on Roko's Basilisk, then that makes you liable for the effects. So if if anyone listening happens to actually take this seriously, I guess stop listening. Yeah. So anyways, Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment, and it's similar to Pascal's wager in some ways, but it kind of deals a little more with kind of a futurism kind of thing. And so this kind of came out of the community blog, Less Wrong, which is like this rationalist society of people that write articles and they comment and do all this different stuff. And so someone had brought this up, and it became like this big deal there for a while.
Didn't they like get rid of it? Like initially, like when it was first posted, like it created I heard something like that.
Yeah, but yeah, so part of that was like, well, this is kind of crazy, and some people are like, well, no, this is really serious, and they couldn't come to a consensus, and it just got really weird. So they kind of tried to scrub it from the place, but some people still took it seriously, still talked about it, stuff like that. So, so the Rokus Basilisk basically posits that in the future, it is inevitable that there will be this artificial intelligent singularity. So we're talking about an artificial intelligence that was so powerful that it is able to replicate itself and manifest itself in physical form, like through, it basically creates robots or androids or whatever, and then it can physically manifest itself through that.
It's like Skynet does that, doesn't it?
Exactly, right. So we're talking essentially Skynet. So if you've seen the Terminator series, or this would be more akin to The Matrix. So this AI singularity occurs, and it completely just washes over the earth, takes over everything. Humans are just, they're released of all their responsibility and all their ownership, and this AI takes over. Now the AI is characterized as a benevolent AI. It's kind of looking out for the good of all living things. But the problem is that it views humans that might be against it or have been against it in the past to be an existential risk to the AI's livelihood in the future. And so it takes it and undergoes acts or deliberate steps to punish anyone who did not help the creation of the AI in the first place. And this is the essence of Roko's Basilisk, that as soon as you learn of it, you have a choice that you now have to make. Knowing that there very well is an inevitable AI singularity in the future, will you take deliberate steps right now to help make that AI become a reality sooner rather than later? And that if you through inaction don't do anything, then you must be against it or not necessarily for it. And so the AI in the future will retroactively punish you for not helping it come to fruition. And so there's some debate as to, well, like, why would an AI do that? And not just to mitigate existential risk, but they were saying that the AI might view that as may view your inaction, or as how it's going to deal with it, as a moral imperative, in that because the AI is so benevolent and so useful, that the longer it takes to come into reality, during that interim time, people are dying and starving, all this kind of stuff. So if you are not doing anything to help it, you're allowing for all of humanity to suffer that much longer than so if you like were bad. Yeah, you're bad. So and the AI has to, and this kind of gets in. There's elements of like quantum theory and multiverse theory in this, in that the AI has to take drastic action in the future to ensure that past actions occur. It's really weird. I don't even want to get into that. That was a whole other rabbit hole.
That makes sense to some degree, but if the AI is so benevolent, would it be forgiving in the future?
Yeah, and I think it needs to make a show of force so that no one else is going to question it, right? Because to question it means that you're going to prolong the suffering of mankind, so you shouldn't question it. And there's an element that the AI is aware of Roko's Basilisk in some ways, and so it wants to make sure people in the past immediately began to try and help it come into being. It's kind of, it's really, really messed up.
Yeah.
And surprisingly enough, it actually gets weirder. So one of the things that people had brought up was that, well, what's the AI going to do to people in the distant past? Like, we don't know when the AI will become, self-aware or hits a singularity event. So, like, will it be able to punish people in the distant past? And so the idea there is that it will attempt to simulate people and punish their simulations, as if that matters. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, that's super weird.
Yeah, and then they're like, well, could it simulate all humans? Like, will it have enough data? Like, the further back you go, the less data there is, so you can't properly simulate things. And they're like, well, an AI of this power could potentially...
Well, it could definitely use quantum physics and retrocausality, and then go...
Right. Yeah, you have
something like that.
What's it called? Reverse entropy. So it could backtrack if you know all the different processes and factors that went into something. You could backtrack and recreate something that had been destroyed, because you can't technically destroy anything. Information cannot be destroyed, which is also debatable when it comes to black holes. Did we talk about that, black holes?
I think we talked about it, and I actually stumbled across something more shortly after that, where I found that there were actually evidences of, let's just say, like, matter being created or destroyed, like, actually, which was really weird, because it's like, well, there's thermodynamics out the window.
Yeah, well, so I don't want to get off into all of that, because that's a whole other thing, and that's way above my intellectual capacity. I can't even scratch that surface. So anyways, like, all this crazy stuff, right? So, like, reverse entropy, they can figure out, like, who and what you are, then make a simulation of you, and then punish you. But so how this becomes like a similar to Pascal's wager is, like, what have you got to lose? Assume that the AI will become a singularity, therefore help it now. And if you're wrong, then oh well. If you're right, then you will have helped it. And if you were wrong, if you didn't help it and it would actually become a thing, now you're really in trouble. So it's kind of I guess it's been characterized as like a futuristic version of Pascal's wager. So that's Roko's Basilisk. Now that you know it,
you're liable.
You're liable. So you need to choose very shortly. Are you going to start making deliberate steps to bring about this super AI in the future, lest you suffer potentially eternal punishment as a simulation? I don't really get that part too much, but that's where some of the multiverse kind of stuff, like, you should buy a lottery ticket now because one of your versions of your future selves could then win the lottery. If you didn't buy a lottery ticket, then none of your future selves could possibly win. Well, it's like, well, isn't there a multiverse where you did buy a lottery ticket? Exactly. Isn't that the point? So I don't know. So that means, like, even with this whole thing, like, okay, what if I decide to help the AI, and that means another version of me is going to decide not to help the AI.
Or what about if you can't actually do anything to help the AI?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. If you like, what are you gonna, like? What am I supposed to do? Like, how do I don't even know how I would actually help. I mean, I personally might have a better idea, but, like, there's a lot of people out there who have no clue how they could help an AI become self-aware, become a thing before its time. I don't know.
Then it would just come down to, like, just being a good person and taking care of other people, right? Because that's what the AI is supposed to do. So if you do that behavior, then you take that to its furthest extent. How you can help the AI, if you can't actually, like, program or do all that kind of stuff, is you being a good person helps other people to be good people, or, like, influences other people to do that, and thus more likely that they'll eventually want to make this AI that wants to take care of people.
Yeah, and your interests, goals are aligned. Hopefully the AI will like see that and understand it. I don't know. I don't know. I think we're far away from AI. We'll see. I mean, so I saw something the other day that talked about a little bit about AI, and it's like we're kind of far away. Like, it's not intuitive. AI can be smart in certain things, but it's very difficult for humans to present problems in such a way that the computer can learn and figure out what to do, and it's kind of crazy. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yep,
so that's Roko's Basilisk. So you're all liable.
Everybody, you're
That's why
liable.
the disclaimer.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day trying to figure out what you're gonna do.
Existential dread now for the rest of your life. You're welcome.
For me, I don't really care, because I don't think it's going to happen within my lifetime. And if they want to bring up a simulation of me in the future, I don't think I'm going to notice.
Yeah,
personally, where I stand on it. Yeah, exactly. So, Well, hey, thanks for watching the episode. Like, comment, subscribe, or give us a review on podcasts. And check us out on Rumble, Afterburner, link in the description for this episode. And let's get out of here.
All right, see ya.